Little Nightmares 3 recently got an 18-minute gameplay clip showing the first area of the game, the necropolis, and there is a lot to go over here, including a closer first look at the fight with the monster baby, new enemies, gameplay mechanics, and more information on how the combat will work, and of course tons of little details that hint towards other parts of the Little Nightmares world. A fascinating example of this is the gnome that can be spotted towards the beginning of the trailer. For a split second you can see a gnome on one of the shelves in a room that Lo and Alone passed through. And like we've talked about in depth in my comprehensive Little Nightmares 2 theory, which you should totally watch by the way, links in the iCard, Six and the Lady are the only people capable of producing gnomes. And these two characters are also more or less confirmed to be the same person, just in a different place on their time loops. So could the presence of this gnome character here possibly indicate that Six or the Lady visited the necropolis at one time? Another thing you might have noticed in this trailer is the presence of windmills. They are everywhere in the necropolis, which from the beginning of the clip seems like it's surrounded by walls, with the entire city almost having a medieval vibe to it with its wagons and clay pottery and little baskets, and very old-fashioned looking shops with a harsh iron and brick aesthetic. And what we learned from one of the interviews with the developers put out by Bandai Namco is that the necropolis is an entirely wind-powered civilization, or at least it was before it fell to ruin and all the inhabitants died, making the city's name very fitting. And later on we can see exactly what happened to the inhabitants of the necropolis. As Lo and Alone explore the place, they find many people turned to stone, their faces always turned away from the camera, which is interesting, possibly to obscure whether they are normal people or misshapen monsters. We can also see a bunch of them in the main poster for Little Nightmares 3. These people clearly turned to stone by the monster baby, victims caught in the light of her eye, which functions very similar to the eyes from the first Little Nightmares. In one of these scenes with the baby, she even looks through an eye-shaped hole in a wall just like the eyes from the first game. And one interesting thing I've noticed about her is how she reaches into these buildings and grabs people she's turned to stone, like a child would with a doll. And maybe I'm reading into this too much and it is just as simple as her being a destructive monster, but I'd like to present an alternate idea. What if this is her seeing the people she turns to stone as her toys, and this is her wanting to play with them? The monster baby stalks Lo and Alone on and off through their journey into the necropolis. Before Lo and Alone end up inside a small house that the baby tears the roof off of, reaching in to grab Lo and Alone. Then suddenly we are somewhere else. It looks to be a cold, dark room with a bed, similar in appearance to the hospital level, especially considering the way this bed looks. But if you remember back to the last trailer, it also looks a lot like these dark enclosed areas that is suspected was some sort of sewer-based level, based on the shot of a monster crawling out of a pipe. But with the release of this gameplay clip, we finally have an answer. On the official Little Nightmares 3 website, one of the passages in the game's description reads, "Discover places as diverse as the desert of the necropolis, a gloomy factory, and an unsettling fun fair." So I'm guessing this area that we're seeing here is this factory, specifically a candy factory. In one of the screenshots on the website, we can see an area that also seems to be from the same general location as the end of the gameplay clip, with Lo and Alone standing next to a huge pile of lollipops. And if you remember back to the last shot from the end of the first trailer, some sort of enormous room filled with piles and piles of some red substance, with a huge claw dropping more of it into the room. And I think now, knowing that this is a candy factory, if you look closer at all this red stuff, it seems pretty likely that that is all also lollipops. Now, I don't actually think that the last part of the necropolis we were shown before the jump to the factory was actually the end of the necropolis level, but probably just a cut to avoid spoilers and hint towards a new location. Because, think about it, it would make no sense just to have Lo and Alone teleport to a new location with no explanation in the middle of a cinematic chase scene. And second, there does seem to be scenes from the necropolis that were in the first trailer but aren't in this clip. And third, it seems like Lo and Alone will be using mirrors to move around the world of Little Nightmares 3, like at the beginning of the gameplay clip, where you can see Lo and Alone emerge from a mirror. And one interesting detail here to point out is you can actually see back through the mirror to where Lo and Alone came from, a place with shelves and an old-fashioned light bulb, making this the first Little Nightmares game where we actually get any indication of where the characters came from before the game started. Another little detail you'll notice upon watching this gameplay clip through is the prevalence of blackbirds. They are everywhere, and I only briefly mentioned these guys in the last Little Nightmares video. But since then I've realized that they may hold a much greater significance, and to understand why, we have to again turn our attention back to the Little Nightmares comics. In the first issue of the comics, a little girl and her brother are being chased by a monster called the North Wind, and this creature is heavily associated with the same blackbirds that look very similar to the ones in this clip, and it is shown that he may even be able to transform into a bird, although the North Wind's body does seem to be composed of black smoke, which is exactly what we see at the end of this clip, black smoke closing in around Lone Alone, the same black smoke that appears to be emerging from the mirror in the poster for the game. And if you really want to look deep into this, the shade of orange that tints the necropolis desert where all the crows are is more or less the same shade of orange of the sky in the comic. So I believe all of this is heavily hinting towards the North Wind playing a big role as the villain in Little Nightmares 3. Now lastly, let's talk about combat. We get to see a good chunk of the combat here, with Lone Alone fighting against the secondary enemies for the Necropolis stage, the Beetles, which can also be seen shown on the main poster for Little Nightmares 3. In this scene, Lone Alone are fighting the Beetles, actually working together in a very clever way to take them down as they spawn, with Lowe shooting them with his bow and arrow, and Alone smashing them with her wrench as soon as they drop to the ground. And I certainly hope that these combat encounters will be less scripted than the ones in Little Nightmares 2. Because in Little Nightmares 2, whenever you are given a weapon, every enemy encounter plays out exactly the same. The weapons are clunky to use, and the whole thing always feels very tedious and chore-like. But already in this new game, the weapons do look more engaging to use. But I just hope that as well, the AI for the enemies has been made to feel less scripted and more natural, making gameplay more fun. Now, we still don't have any additional information on a release date for Little Nightmares 3. But I would guess later in 2024, as in the corner of the gameplay we were shown, it does say pre-alpha footage, indicating that this game is still pretty early on in its development. Although I would doubt that it will be delayed into the next year like the second game, as the developers don't have COVID to deal with this time around. So I'd expect Little Nightmares 3 maybe in fall of 2024, sometime around the 1-year anniversary of when it was originally announced. So that's it for this video. Why don't you go down in the comments and leave a comment and subscribe, and to boost all engagement and watch time and other stuff that I pretend not to care about. And if you did really like the video, then why don't you go down the description and join my Discord server. I lost a little pop-up in the corner that tells you to join the Discord server, but I'm too lazy to recreate it, so just pretend it's there and go join it. Who am I kidding? No one even watches these outro segments anyway. Goodbye. See you in the next video.